Good day, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of On the Fly Wi-Fi. I am your host, Mike Leibovitz. I'm super excited to have the opportunity to broadcast out to everybody today. I have two really cool guests with me today to help talk about mobility and Wi-Fi and trends and expectations that we have for 2014. I have sitting here with me a good friend and colleague of mine, Will Aguilar. Will, why don't you take a minute and say hi to everybody?
Hi everybody, how's it going?
And we also got remote from us sitting down in North Carolina, another really good individual, a mobility architect, a fellow named Sean Hogston.
How you doing?
So we're super excited to have the opportunity, to talk about Wi-Fi, and hopefully, from an industry perspective, and all of you that are tuning in today can really get some good value and some good understanding of what we think about in terms of Wi-Fi in particular and mobility in general. And so, as we kind of come out of 2013, there was really a huge year in terms of wireless and mobility and what we saw, mega trends that occurred and continue to occur, and particularly the adoption rates of mobile devices and mobility is just at astronomical heights now. And what we're starting to see, in terms of how many mobile devices have been shipped over the year, we're now approaching, stats and numbers of, billions of smartphones, and in fact, 1 billion smartphones were shipped over the last year. At this point now, there's more mobile devices than people on Earth. It's astronomically high, and the adoption continues thrusting. I read a report recently by the Wi-Fi Alliance, actually, that suggests over 71% of wireless data traffic traverses the Wi-Fi protocol, and it's just outstanding, unbelievable to think that globally, over 70% of all wireless data traffic is going over Wi-Fi. So as we move into 2014, there's certainly some big aspirations that companies and organizations have in terms of pervasive Wi-Fi, and certainly capacity is a big element to what we need to handle. And of course, as more devices come into our environment, more onslaught of these devices, we need to take the time to understand, well, how do we plan for capacity? What do we think about in terms of capacity? And really a traditional kind of capacity versus coverage conversation. So I'm going to flip it over to Will, and we'll start the conversation here, particularly around capacity and what sort of things we think about in terms of capacity and coverage.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So, a couple of years ago, I would say that everybody was concerned really more about a coverage design. How do I get the maximum amount of coverage with the least number of APs? But as you mentioned, there's been a huge explosion of mobile devices, consumer devices. Some folks call it consumerization of IT, where you have just an explosion of these mobile devices. The smartphones. The tablets and so forth in the network, and the days are long gone for just coverage designs. The name of the game today is really capacity, designing to your capacity, to the capacity that you expect. And everybody feels the pain, whether you're a university or a high school or an elementary school or even a large stadium. It's the same, it's the same denominator. It's that you have a lot of users in tight physical spaces using a lot of very high bandwidth, type of applications like video and so forth and demand. So it's critical that you think about your design from a capacity perspective. Certainly that's given rise to 5 gigahertz to better 5 gigahertz planning. As everybody knows, and Sean can certainly expand on it, 2.4 is kind of, we maxed it out. There's only really 3 channels that are available in the U.S. and in other parts of the world. So there's just not enough capacity to handle just those explosion of these devices, which means that a lot of customers or a lot of deployments that were previously designed for coverage were also only designed for 2.4. So
for sure,
you need to consider that moving forward as you invest in updating your wireless network. That you're potentially looking at 2 to 3 times, sometimes even potentially 4 times, depending on the size of or the density that you're trying to shoot for. Deployments or a number of APs versus what you had previously, right? And it's not just the RF space that you need to worry about, but obviously, as you like to say, Mike, everything over the air eventually comes back into the grid, into the wire. So having the correct infrastructure on the switching side to be able to support that, not only the data path for your data, but also for the power to provide power to those devices is critical.
Yeah, for sure. So Sean, what do you think in terms of, when you're talking to prospects out there, trying to help them think about, coverage designs that really blend for capacity and not just necessarily in a super high density environment, but what's a top of mind conversation that you have typically with prospects and customers?
Well, we also, not just coverage, but your density is a bigger concern, right? So the coverage part of it is easy. It's very easy to get coverage in an environment, but what you really have to get the customer to think about is what's in their environment, where are people going to congregate, their meeting spaces, areas that they tend to get a lot of people in a single space, and you may not have a large number of APs traditionally in that area. So we try to look at those kinds of things as well as different hazards in the environment, right? We've run into situations where customers have retrofitted buildings and had issues in certain rooms with coverage, and come to find out it was an old hospital, and they set up their boardroom in what used to be the X-ray lab. So every time they shut the door, everybody in that room would go offline and they'd lose all access. So those kinds of things that a customer may not typically think about when they put in the request to the local sales team that just says, hey, we want to get Wi-Fi in the building, right? So we have to be able to think about some of those things that the customer may not think of up front.
Yeah, and so I guess what really starts becoming interesting, and I started using this term, and other people have kind of changed it, but bring your own anything, BYOA. Some people say BYOE, bring your own everything. And I think what's interesting in bring your own anything realm is not just any device or anywhere, but now it's really starting to turn into applications, right? Bring your own application. And so when we really talk about capacity, it's not just how many devices and how many users, but what type of applications are they using, and how are those applications traversing the network, whether it's upload traffic, download traffic. I don't know, Will, you think that enough people put applications up front when they're trying to design, or you think it's too much of a secondary thought?
No, I think it has to be part of the initial design. One of the things that has worked well with us, working with some of our large wireless deployments, is that we work with a customer, we help the customer identify the applications that they're going to use in the network, right? If, for example, if you're talking about a hospital and predominantly designing for voice over IP, that's going to be a different design, a different capacity design, a different coverage design that, for example, a higher ed type of facility or a large stadium that's really looking at video, providing video in that network. So it's critical that not only you identify the type of users that are going to be connected, the customers that are connected in your network, also identify the applications that those users are going to use. But just as critical is identifying the devices that they're going to use. And the reason I say that is, you may spend, you may decide, for example, that you're going to spend your resources in deploying a 3x3x3 11N network, just to find out that 90% of your users are using 1x1 devices. So you design this beautiful network, but it has a lot of high capacity, but the users themselves, those user devices, are just low power devices designed for 1x1. So you're not really getting the bang for your buck. So it's critical that you identify your users, you identify the predominantly at least the applications that they're going to be using, or the application types, and the devices that they're going to be using. And as Sean mentioned, certainly location is critical also in your design. Yep. Sean mentioned like the X-ray room, but is it open air? Is it an old building with a lot of concrete? So these are a lot of questions that you really need to ask, and you need to do it before you design your network, right? I mean, we wish that a Wi-Fi network was cookie cutter, but by experience we know that's not the case, right? It's unique to your environment, and really the onus is on ourselves and other vendors out there to help our partners and help our customers ask the right questions for them to arrive at the right solution.
So if I were going to be bold enough to suggest, 2014, does it become the year of planning? Like, does planning become cool again, chic? Sean, what's your take on is 2014 going to become a year of planning and people really kind of taking a step back and trying to solve a holistic problem as opposed to a individual point problem, an application or device? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it has to, right? So I think that the days of just buying a bunch of Wi-Fi gear and throwing it up there and tweaking it once it's in the air, I think those days are going to be gone, especially when you bring in AC. And we have to deal with the fact that now we have to think about channels in the 5 gig range, right? So historically, we haven't really concerned ourselves too much with what channels are we doing in 5 gig because we had a good a lot more channels to use than we did in 2.4. So the concentration was on 2.4 to make sure we get the proper 1, 6, and 11 split. 5 gig, we just assign them. We have plenty of channels to use. That's not the case with AC anymore. So I think the planning piece is going to come back, not just for the coverage, but for the density and what channels we're going to use in those environments are going to require a lot more care than they have over the last few years.
For sure, and I guess 5 gigahertz is really top of mind for everybody. Whether they're thinking about 11N and perhaps upgrading or making kind of fulfilling the promise of 11N and kind of finishing off the design, perhaps for those that started with a 2.4 network moving to 5 gigahertz, or those that are kind of making the leap to 11 AC. And so, 5 gigahertz, I think certainly in 2014 becomes really the focal point in terms of designing a network and really what you're trying to do. But the question that everybody keeps asking is, hey, if I want, in 11 AC terms or even in 11N terms, if I want really, really dense deployment and high throughput or very high throughput rates, is it possible, physically possible, to put that many APs that close together? I know, Will, that's certainly something that you get asked pretty often. What do you think in terms of the 5 gigahertz design and actually trying to achieve those sorts of data rates?
No, it's definitely possible and probable, right? Especially in the 5 gigahertz spectrum where there's enough channels, at least when you're talking about 20 megahertz and 40 megahertz channels, right? If we start talking about 80 megahertz channels and 160 megahertz channels, then you start getting into the same constraints that we have today with 2.4. So, but certainly from a 5 gigahertz perspective, there's plenty of capacity there to be able to address those high density deployments. And I know 11AC is new, is sexy, everybody's talking about it. It hasn't been ratified yet, but it should be ratified early next year. But the fact is that many enterprise deployments or many deployments are really predominantly 2.4. They may have 5 gigahertz there because it was a dual radio access point, but it wasn't really designed for 5 gigahertz. So you either have gaps in your 5 gigahertz coverage today and you're not getting the benefit, the most benefit for it, or because of the smaller cell sizes of 5 gigahertz compared to 2.4, you're not really maximizing the performance that you could get from those clients. So, before we start, talking about 11AC, I talk to customers about, hey, let's take a step back and have you assess your network from a 5 gigahertz perspective. Do you have the coverage today to provide the bandwidth that your customers need at the density that you need with 5 gigahertz? And the technology is there today to be able to do that. You don't need to pay a premium for 11AC to do that, right? It's really just a matter of taking advantage of what's available there today. The other part of the story of the 11AC, it's from the 5 gigahertz spectrum perspective. Before most handheld devices were predominantly 2.4 because 5 gigahertz tends to require more power. It drains the battery in those devices. Obviously, the range is not as long as 2.4. With improvements in silicon technology in the last couple of years, we've seen more and more handset devices. As the manufacturers are able to put more and more transistors into the die, they use less power from those devices. So you're starting to see more and more devices that are both dual band. So if you design for 5 gigahertz today, even if you don't have the budget to pay for a premium on 11AC, As long as you design for 5 gigahertz today and redesign your network for 5 gigahertz, you're going to start getting a lot of benefits as those clients start moving to 11 AC or to 5 gigahertz, because as you know, 11 AC is backward compatible to 11N.
Sure. So, I mean, it's an interesting point of conversation. I don't know, Sean, have you seen a lot of customers and environments that you've been in that actually purposely designed around 5 gigahertz? I mean, my gut feel is that very few and far between environments you'd come across that were purposely designed in 11N for 5 gigahertz use. What's your take on that, and how do you think we best help those customers move to 5 gigahertz? Obviously, taking into consideration cabling and PoE and all the rest of it. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of them, from what we've seen, it's been focused around 2.4, right? Because they're designing for the least common denominator, which is something that you do have to consider, like we said. But it just depends on really the customer's point of view. Some customers were still viewing this as a commodity. It's a nice to have. It doesn't necessarily have coverage for the whole building. So it really depends on what their initial thought process was when they went into whatever their last Wi-Fi design was. So I think as we start to look at AC going forward, we at least need to have the conversation with these customers and say, hey, when's the last time that you had a survey done, right? Because you may have done a predictive design to put these things up, but they don't always go back and do a post-installation survey. What's changed in their environment over the last year, or 2 years, or 3 years since they put in some of their existing gear that we may need to reaccount for. So even though they may have an existing network, and people like to think that, okay, well, when AC comes out, we'll just unhook the old AP and put the new one up there, and we'll just keep on going. And I don't think that that's going to be the case. We need to have the discussions and take a look at what their environment really looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when we think about the transition from ABG to 11N, at the time, it was kind of a 2.4 design to a 2.4 design, and really what was promoted and many of the environments we work in really just ripped and replaced, took ABG access points off the wall, put the 11N AP on the wall. Many of those APs supported AF power, so there wasn't really much of a concern in terms of cabling and PoE. Now in the new realm, is it realistic for customers to think that they can rip and replace an 11N AP or APs in an environment and achieve AC and AC rates? Or do they almost need to start from scratch, almost a day one project, and say, hey, I have certain goals that I'm trying to achieve. I need to think about Wi-Fi starting today into 3 years from now and erase everything I did in the past. Sorry. I don't know, Will. What do you think? It's
Yeah, I think it depends on the customer, right? If you're talking about, for example, a K through 12, for those outside the U.S., for elementary schools or basic schools, we typically, because of the density, we got 20, 25, 30 student per classrooms, we typically recommend an AP per classroom. So if you design to that with your 11N technology, you're probably good to go because you're already designed for density from the out. So can you expect 11 AC rates, with the 256 QAM and so forth in a classroom? Yeah, absolutely, right? You take that AP, you put an 11 AC AP there, and you're good to go. But most customers are not going to be like that, right? A lot of the other verticals, the higher eds or whatever the case may be, hotels, where they're putting stuff, cost is important, so they put it in a hallway instead of, in multiple, rooms and so forth. They're absolutely going to have to redesign it. Now, if you're comfortable today, I mean, if you feel like you design your network for 2.4 and 5 coverage for 11N, if you take out an 11N AP and you put in an 11N AC AP, your 11N is not going to get worse, right? The 11N is going to be just as good as before. I get a little bit upset with some vendors that are claiming that the new 11AC chipsets give you better performance on the 11N clients. That's not really the reality. In reality, it's really, the drivers that they're using on those clients are using some of the advanced features that were available previously in 11N and some 11N infrastructure. So it's not really an 11AC, per se. It's really a benefit of better client drivers or even better radios on the client side. But But if you forget that, and you design, at a best case, I said that you already designed your network for 2, 4, and 5 before, and you were running perfectly fine for 2 years. You take out those APs and you put a 1-to-1 replacement with an 11 AC. You're going to get, maybe 25, 30 feet, close to the AP. You'll get those 11 AC rates, but after that, it drops off dramatically, pretty quickly back to 11N, right? So, again, Wi-Fi is not a, you can't do a blueprint. You can't say, cookie cutter type of design, but if you guesstimate that it takes about 2 to 3 times more APs to design for 11N 5 gigahertz coverage than it does for 2.4, I think it takes another 2 times as many APs after that, or maybe even 2.5, 3 times APs to provide pervasive 11 AC coverage, right? What I mean by that is those very high rates are using 256 QAM and so forth with the wider channels. It's going to require a lot more APs in that network.
Yeah, and I guess some of the design conversations that we've been engaged in, even internally talking about, what do you target in terms of, data rates, signal strength? Is it just a signal strength conversation? Obviously, with 11 AC and particularly 256 QAM, the new modulation technique requires a higher signal-to-noise ratio, and so being able to achieve all of these things, I think, and I kind of feel that customers kind of need to start almost from scratch, really understand what they're trying to achieve and where they want to achieve it. Perhaps they want 11 AC gig rates or near gig rates in certain areas, in certain environments, and kind of hotspot those as opposed to a pervasive 11 AC deployment. I guess there's still a lot of things for us to learn collectively as an industry around it. I'm curious, Sean, when you get questions around 11 AC, do you feel that most people that are asking the question have a firm grasp on how 11 AC works, what the differences are, and really what's realistic in terms of delivery?
It depends on who you're talking to, right? So I think that as you go up the chain of command higher, then obviously that understanding usually gets a little bit less, right? Because they tend to get just the key buzzwords, right? They know it's gigabit Wi-Fi and things like that. But when you're talking to the engineers who are going to be responsible for maintaining this on a daily basis and running it, they tend to have a little bit better understanding and more realistic expectations, right? So again, we go back to what do you really want to do with Wi-Fi, right? Do you just want to be able to get the people online without having to plug in and check their email, or do you have an application that you want to be able to use? Do you have a video conferencing application you want to be able to use around the site and with remote users? So you have to understand what they really want to do. And when you mention going back and looking at the infrastructure, do we need to consider, are they going to require an upgrade to PoE Plus? Are they going to take advantage of some of the other features that vendors offer, like an integration with an ACK solution or some type of network management? And you have to consider what the underlying wired infrastructure is, right? Is it going to support your overall vision of where you want to go in a unified environment? So those are things that you've got to get more into the technical people to have those discussions, and they'll have a better understanding of what that executive that's talking at the 10,000 foot level, how that gets translated in their organization down to something that we can actually put on paper as a project and get installed.
And I think that to some, I agree with Sean. The access layer cost, indirect cost, is clear or more clear than the core cost, right? And what I mean by that is, if you look back, I don't want to say my age, I look a lot younger, but in any case, if you look back at the 11N progression, when a lot of competitors came out with 11N solutions, early 11N solutions, it was not only the investment on the new access points, it was investment on the switching infrastructure. A lot of customers had, 10100 back then. A lot of them didn't have PoE, so it was an investment there. But then, because most of those designs, the 800-pound gorillas at the time were predominantly, selling centralized designs, it meant a bigger appliance, a bigger, wireless controller in many cases, and then bigger pipes to your network at that core, wherever that appliance was located. So, if you go back, if you fast forward, 4 years now, we're in the same. It's the same thing, right? I mean, so if your solution vendor that you're looking at doesn't give you the flexibility of dropping all the traffic directly on your wired network and not centralize it, guess what? Not only do you have to pay the 20%, 25% premium on the AP hardware for 11AC right now, you're probably going to have to spend some money on AT power. Most vendors today with 11AC solutions, they require AT power, so that means either mid-spans or switching infrastructure in your access layer. But now if you're tunneling all that traffic back to the controllers, guess what? That means higher cost on those appliances, potentially 10 gig interfaces that have to go back to your to your routing core. So there are many costs associated with it. On the other side, if you go with a purely distributed model, then you lose flexibility of a centralized model, right? You lose some of the scalability that a centralized model provides you. So it's critical that when we start talking about technology, I'm an old security guy, and when people said, hey, how much should I spend on security? And it's like, well, it depends how much is it what you want to protect. If I have a $1 million ring and I spend $2 million in insurance on it, then I'm probably losing money on it, right? So, and the Wi-Fi, it's kind of like that now. Really, it's what's really your pain point? Are you having problems in a hotspot around your in a particular place in your campus where you're just getting overrun with density and many applications, many customers? Maybe that's what you should focus in instead of taking the whole swag and redesigning your entire network. Really let your customers, your pain points drive what the solution is going to be. And there's just so many different options out there now that you really need to, as a customer, need to look at. Really, what's my pain point? What's best for me? And I want I need a solution that's going to give me the most flexibility, because I don't know what next year is going to bring or the year after that.
So do we think that 2014 is the year of 11AC, or are people trying to solve other problems, other aspects of their business? A couple elements that I read about, we talk about all the time. Location and analytics, two really big aspects. We hear a lot about it, in particular in the retail industry, around being able to locate users, being able to run some type of analytics, some type of actionable analytic against them. Seems that it's kind of percolating now into other verticals, whether it's healthcare, education, certainly in the hospitality, hotels, and venues of the sort. Do you think, and maybe I'll start with you, Sean, do you think that in 2014 people are really only primarily looking for feeds and speeds, like, hey, I need this thing to go faster, I need the fastest car on the highway? Or maybe it's more about the solutions and the value, the management capabilities, the location capabilities, the analytics, adding value back to the business in terms of return on the investment that's being made?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to become less about just speeds and feeds, right? Because if you think about it, compare it to a physical presence, right? As you get more and more people into a location, you have to think about what are they doing while they're there, right? How can you keep an eye on them? When you look at large venues, just adding more people into a small area, you then have to add, like Will mentioned, your security has got to increase. You've got to know what these people are trying to do. The same thing applies when you talk about adding those devices onto your network, right? The more devices you add, you've got to look at the other pieces of your infrastructure. And then as you get all those people and those devices online, what are you going to do with that traffic? How are you going to manage that traffic so it doesn't just overwhelm your fundamental network? So can we isolate things like bonjour traffic, right, and keep them contained where they need to be and not just rebroadcasting them through a gateway across the entire network infrastructure, right? And really having the discussion, again, it comes back to the customer and, what problem or what goal is it that they're trying to solve, right? Are they having an issue that they're trying to solve today? And getting to the root of that discussion, and then then laying out for the customer, okay, by using these particular products, you can solve this problem that you're having today, and we can make that environment better, and we can also make it easier for you to manage and things like that. So those are the things that we need to look at, like we said before, on top of density and coverage and what really are you going to do with that traffic once it gets onto the network? How can we contain it, and how can we analyze that and provide some feedback back so that if the decisions that the customer makes today you've got a way to analyze that traffic going forward and make sure that that was the right decision. So maybe you want to schedule follow-ups and a quarter or 2 quarters later, and you can go back and look at that analytical data and say, okay, you know what, we made the right decision here, but on this part of the network we're noticing a different bottleneck or a different issue, so we need to tweak that a little bit, right? And having that ability to provide analytics and give those customers that information, I think is going to what sets different vendors apart.
Yeah. So, I definitely agree. I mean, when we talk about, I talked a little bit earlier about identifying your customers, identifying, the applications and the devices that they were connecting on the network. After you design this thing and you deploy it, you need to be able to have visibility, and not only visibility, but also control in your network, right? And control, location has some connotations as part of control, from a control perspective also. The funny thing about location is that if you talk to anybody today, for example, any customer I'll talk to, that's telling me, hey, you're going to need 2 times more APs in order to provide, good triangulation and location services. They say, forget it. I don't have that money to spend. But the problem is going to be solved for you. Why? Because you're going to add more APs to your network anyways for 11AC. So I think location is just going to come up. It's kind of like a data center. I spent all this money on a virtual data center, so now I can just add another application to my virtual data center, and my ROI is better. So I think location is going to come for free as part of the density designs that are coming up, because now you're going to get greater visibility into your network. You're going to have multiple APs that are going to see that client. You're going to be able to better locate that user without having to spend additional money to locate that device.
That's cool. Right? That's a pretty cool angle, actually, to think that, certainly in the past when people have talked about location, particularly RTLS, RFID type solutions, there's been a specific design around that type of criteria. And I guess what you're suggesting, Will, and maybe a pretty cool concept to think about, is that location maybe in 2014 is sort of coming to the masses, that as you deploy more APs, you're almost starting to put in a design that would allow you to do better, cleaner triangulation through the RF to devices. How do you think people are going to utilize that in 2014? Do you think that it starts to give the ability in terms of actionable data, actionable analytics to help bridge the end user experience with the IT side, the IT net admins that are actually trying to manage an ever exploding environments? And I guess that's kind of an interesting point there, right?
Yeah, it really depends on the vertical. I'm kind of a vertical guy, right? I don't think everything fits. You can't fit around peg in a square hole all the time. So really it depends on the vertical. You talk to a hospital, to a healthcare provider, it's critical that they have some obviously life critical assets that they need to be able to locate right away in their network. So they may use it for that. And maybe your basic or not basic, but your Wi-Fi network is not alone won't be able to provide that. Maybe you need integration with one of the market leading RTLS type of vendors. But if you start looking at as far as education, some use cases about tracking a lost laptop. But there's other use cases like troubleshooting, right? I mean, 70%. I've seen some numbers. 70% of the time it takes IT to solve a problem is spent trying to figure out where the problem is in the first place. So when you have visibility into your network, and not just the wireless network, there's no more, hey, I have an application for my wireless network, and I have another application, another IT set of teams working on my wire side. We can't afford it. Customers can't afford it. They just don't have the budget to do that. You need to have a visible, centralized, single pane of glass platform that you can identify the problems, quickly, and then react to them before they become a problem in your network, right? Mm-hmm. So, I think location, there's many uses. I mean, from analytics, you mentioned, from a large venue perspective, you look at a stadium, and if you're selling ads, for example, in your application, it's important for you to, see, when are your users are going to be highest usage in your network, because maybe you're charging a different amount for those ads, right, versus when you have low usage in your network. Another one that became clear with us with some of our projects is, what devices are being used in the network. One of our customers, they have an application for during the game day, that if they were to design the application based on what the market says, that Android has a higher portion of the market than Apple does, they would have designed it with Android for Android devices first. Yet when we run the analytics during game day or during game time, 80% of their connections are from iPhone devices.
Yep.
So they would have made the wrong decision. So it really depends. You need data, and you need the right data, if you will, right? It's not just about raw data, but you need the right data to be able to make an intelligent business decision. Because as I said, I don't know about other places, but budgets, as far as I know, are not unlimited, and you got to do the best you can with what you got. You got to get the most out of your bucks, and visibility into your network is critical. And I think you're going to get that much more now when you solve the density issue moving forward.
Yeah. So I guess location and analytics, the ability to add value back to the business in terms of who's doing what on the network, and also add perhaps some efficiencies on the IT side in terms of troubleshooting and managing the user experience. Do these things start to play into BYOD? And I think in 2014, BYOD, again, the frenzy continues in terms of how many devices are coming into environments. I read, and certainly there's a couple of studies out there that suggest that organizations are going to require at least 20% capacity increase in 2014 in their existing Wi-Fi, and of that, 75% of that increase is just for BYOD, just for the existing users, and how much more they're going to bring in. So, in 2014, and Sean, do you think that the location analytics, BYOD, all of these solutions that people are trying to put together, do you think that they kind of merge and sort of come together in a single kind of pill, let's say, that customers and prospects should be thinking about in terms of, I need all of these pieces. I don't necessarily need a faster radio and a faster client, but I need all of these things put together for success.
Well, yeah, and that's, like we talked about before, we want to look at the solution, right? So the solution that you may provide to a customer that's going to provide the solution for the problem that they have, right? So that doesn't just mean faster AP radios, because like we said, faster AP radios means more data coming to the AP, means more data coming out of the AP onto the network, and like we said, you've got to be able to do something with all that, right? So when we talk to customers and prospective customers, we try to lay out for them the solution that we're going to provide and what advantage is that going to have to their business, right? It's going to solve the problems that they have. Is it going to help their IT guys do it with less effort, which at the end of the year is a savings in money as well. So all these things tied in relate. Locationing is not just about keeping track of a crash cart in a hospital anymore. It's like Will said, it's troubleshooting the problems and finding the device and saving the IT guys and the help desk some time when they get that call, right? I'm having a problem getting connected. Well, what are you trying to connect to? Well, I don't know. I'm just standing here in the hallway trying to connect. So being able to figure those things out helps overall, and that's being able to provide a complete solution. I think is something that the customers will find much more attractive as compared to having to put pieces together all over the place, right? Because then they're supporting multiple products, they're calling multiple vendors if they have an issue, and you end up with finger pointing at things. So when you look at all of that overall, all of those things combine together to provide cost savings in most situations to the customer, and definitely administrative help as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think, and we can kind of go around the table here and kind of make as bold of a prediction as we each feel for 2014. But my take, moving into the new year, I think 2014 is really about the end user. I think that certainly a lot of marketing and a lot of press and hype around 11AC and speeds and feeds and location stuff that's happening and analytics stuff. I mean, all of these things really amount to providing an end user experience. And to me, I think that the focal point in 2014, particularly for mobility and Wi-Fi wireless, is really around the end user first and foremost, starting at the end user and working all the way back into the infrastructure. I don't know what you guys think most bold about 2014, what we're most likely to see this year. Will?
That's not very bold, right? I mean, I think whether it's 2014, 2015, or 2016, it should always be about the end user. It should always be. I mean, I'm a techie guy, but technology for the sake of technology doesn't really make sense, right? So it's really about solving the customer's problem, the end user problem, and the end users could be different, right? The end user that's connecting to your wireless network is different than the IT administrator that needs to maintain that network, right? So their set of problems are different. But I definitely agree with you. Mobility, it's here to stay. It's just going to continue to grow. As an old guy, you design stuff, with 40% capacity in mind. It's incredible with these Wi-Fi networks. Kids go off to college, to holiday, come back 3 weeks later. They have 60, 70% more connections in your network. There goes the growth that you have projected is gone in a month, right? So I think that mobility and then the pain points that come with it are going to be certainly the year 2014, and I definitely agree with you that 5 gigahertz, thanks to 11AC, is back at the forefront. But if I have any recommendation is to our customers and to the folks listening is, look at the different solutions and then just don't buy a marketing hype. Really understand what your pain points are and really plan out, in a phased approach, how you're going to address those pain points.
Excellent. Sean?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll follow a similar type of thing. The end user obviously is a big piece, but not just a matter of it about being the end user. I think it's going to be making that end user experience a lot more seamless, right? Because I think the help desk in most companies still get a lot of calls about getting connected to the network, right? How can they get on and use the wireless network? And that gets exacerbated when you open up some type of BYOD program, right? So when you start to let employees bring their own devices now, and that could be with a published, well-written company policy on what you can bring, which I find is usually few and far between. More likely, it's just that they don't yell at you anymore for bringing in your own device. So a lot of the customers have just kind of gone into a whole BYOD program without actually putting in place a proper BYOD policy. So in that, we need to look at how do we make the end user experience much more seamless so that it doesn't frustrate that user, and it also doesn't frustrate IT because all of a sudden they're getting a flood of calls for devices that they're not even responsible to manage, right? So all those things come in, and then, like we said before, giving the customer an analytics engine that they can watch the network over time, because as with many other years previously, there's going to be something that comes up during the year that they didn't expect, right? There's the new whiz-bang gadget that comes out, and now all of a sudden everybody has it, your growth has exploded, or your particular application use has exploded, and that application's causing problems somewhere else in your network. So I think for this year, being able to analyze what all those users and all that traffic is doing on your network, I think is going to be a big thing for 2014.
Yeah, I guess one thing that's for certain is that wireless networks aren't going to get any smaller. Certainly not in 2014 are we going to see any sort of decrease in terms of how many devices are being carried, in terms of how many access points are being put out there. I mean, I think that the explosion will continue, and at the end of the day, people that are designing networks really do need to consider, planning up front, being prepared to try to control the uncontrollable, and really doing the best to consult with the customer and best understand what fits in their particular environment. And again, 2014, from my perspective, certainly isn't about speeds and feeds. It's probably less about speeds and feeds than ever, even though 11AC is here and could do some wonderful things for all of us in terms of density and capacity. But that's just my take on it. So we've been going at this for about 45 minutes. I think we've had a really, really good session. I certainly thank both you, Will, and Sean for joining us today on the first episode of On the Fly Wi-Fi. There's going to be a lot more to come. We've got a really exciting episode for January, so definitely check out ontheflywifi.net for an update very, very soon about an exciting episode mid to late January. So again, Mike Leibovitz, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you guys really soon.
Thank you.
Bye.